I'm Lou Maiuri, and I live in Summersville, West Virginia. And I've lived there full time for 25 years. And I was born and raised in Fairmont County. I was born November the 27th, 1928. In one more month, I'll be 97 years old.
And where were you born again?
I was born in Montgomery,
Okay.
a little town in Fairmont County.
Cool. And could you talk a bit about like what a normal day is for you these days? What do you spend your time doing?
Today, this day and time? Well, like I said, I'm old now. And now, normally I'll spend a day now. Of course, I still cut my own grass and tend my own yard. And I live by myself. And my day usually starts early in the morning because I got a little Chihuahua dog who wakes me up at 6 o'clock. And most of the time, I eat out. But sometimes I cook my own breakfast. I'm a good cook. And I can cook a lot of things. And I'll get up in the morning, and if I don't go somewhere and eat, I'll cook my breakfast. And then I'll watch a little bit of news on TV and just kind of wind down after getting up. And I seldom ever eat lunch at home. I just don't cook at home. And as I got older, I kind of lost my appetite. And I eat because it's time to eat. But I usually go out and eat in the afternoon. And I've got 2 or 3 places I like to eat. I rotate back and forth with the Cracker Barrel and Shoney's at Flatwoods, and of course the Cracker Barrel in Beckley, and I like Shoney's in Lewisburg. Then that's where I usually eat my noon meals or my evening meals. And if I eat breakfast out, I like McDonald's breakfast. And then there's a little there's a little restaurant over at Calum, West Virginia. It's called the Hilltop Cafe. And they serve good home cooked food. And they make really good fried potatoes. And I like fried potatoes for breakfast. So I'll go over there and I'll eat biscuits and fried potatoes and eggs for breakfast over there. And of course, in the summertime, I own 2 farms, and I have one 85-acre farm, and then I got a little place got 5 acres in it, and that's where I live. And of course, I still cut my own grass, and I raise a garden, and I usually do what chores I have to do around the house, and I still pay my bills the old-fashioned way. I write checks and I take care of that. And that's pretty much a normal day for me.
And do you still call square dances frequently?
Now, I usually average 2 or 3 square dances a month. Now, I think I have 3 this month, counting this one. And I had one at Cass, and had another one somewhere, but I usually do 2 or 3 a month. Now, it kind of winds down in the winter.
And when you were at your busiest calling, like years ago, how many dances did you call a month? Years ago when you were really busy as a caller.
Well, years ago, I had a performing clogging team, and that's really how I got started into calling. I danced on a competition team, and then for one reason or another, I had a grandson and a granddaughter that I taught to dance, and my wife danced. I decided to form my own team. And the competition rules, if you dance in competition, and you do Appalachian squares or old time four couple squares, then you have to have a caller from a set, because in the old days they didn't have any amplification, and the caller called from a set. And if he had enough volume in his voice, sometimes he'd call from a stage. But most of the time, our calling was done from a set.
Is that how you learned?
And that's how actually I got into calling. And because dancing in competition, you had to have a caller in the set. And so I danced 3 or 4 different traditional categories. Back when I started, they only had 9 categories, but a 6 couple, an 8 couple hoedown, and a 4 couple running set hoedown, and what we call a 4 couple country hoedown. And of course, they had the same categories in precision, but I danced the hoedown categories of freestyles, and you had to have a caller in the set, and they judged the caller in the set too. So it was necessary for me to learn to call. And then we did a lot of performances for the public, and the performances that we did I always included the audience in the performances, and I'd get them up and I'd get them into a square dance. And of course, you know, that was another reason I had to learn to call. So, but anyway, and in later years, I got interested in judging competition. I've been a competition judge for 45 years, and I'm certified by the Hall of Fame. And
which Hall of Fame? The clogging?
The America's Clogging Hall of Fame. And I'm certified by the National Clogger, all the major organizations. And then being a judge and judging square dance, you know, the figures have to be recognized. The judges have to be able to recognize the figures. And I saw lots of different figures, because the rule that they had was that the figures had to remain recognizable to the judges, but, you know, they encouraged creativity in the figures. So I had to see a lot of figures, and I had to learn a lot of figures. And
how did you learn them? Did someone teach you them, or how did you learn to call? Did you
how did I learn to call?
Yeah.
Well, like I said, I was on a competition team. I danced on a competition team for 3 or 4 years. And it was a world championship team. It was probably the best hoedown team in West Virginia. And we won national champions. And the director of our group was Garland Steele, and he was an excellent square dance caller. And of course, I learned some from him, but most of what I learned is I learned when I formed my own team and judging and studying figures. I did a lot of research and studied figures. And
when you did research, what do you mean by that? Did you go watch other people?
Well, early on, I had a couple of heroes. You know, Garland Steele was one, and Bill Nichols was another one from Walhalla, South Carolina. And they were probably the 2 world's leading authorities on Southern Appalachian square dancing and running set hoedown. And I observed them a lot, but I didn't copy, because I didn't want to be painted with the same brush they were. And so I developed my own style of calling, you know. I mean, I don't sound like Bill Nichols, and I don't sound like Garland Steele, and I don't sound like Mike Samples, you know. I got my own style of calling.
Could you talk about what makes a good caller in your eyes?
Well, what makes a good caller? Well, now, you know, it's hard to say what a good caller is, you know, because there's all kinds of callers. And the primary purpose of a square dance caller is simply to tell the dancers what to do. Now, that's it. Now, and if you learn, you're just learning. So you learn 2 or 3 figures, and Taylor's been teaching you, and I'm sure he used some of the pattern that he uses, and a lot of your figures might sound like Taylor calling. You say, well, you can learn to call that way. But like I said, the primary purpose of a square dance caller is just simply to tell the dancers what to do. Now, we got some callers that I think they go overboard calling, you know. I think they go overboard, and they entertain themselves more than they do the dancers. And
you mean, do they call really difficult figures, or the pattern that they use?
The patterns that they use, and some of them use too much pattern, and some of them use, well, I'd say not enough, but you can use too much pattern, you can use too much instruction, and I could give you some examples of that, but now I can use pattern with the best of them. Now I can. I know as much pattern as any caller that walks this earth, and but I know when to use it and when not to use it, and depending on what kind of a crowd I'm calling to, you see. Now, for instance, I know a caller that calls a figure like do-si-do, and if her voice is not real good and clear, especially, now you do pretty good if you're calling to people. It's no job to call to people and know the figures. Now you know, you can just get up and just walk away, and most of the time they'll dance ahead of you anyway because they know the figures. But the secret is learning to call and teach new dancers and being able to get them through a dance and get them to have fun. But I'll give you, for instance, a figure called do-si-do. And now if I was calling that figure, this lady that I'm talking about, she'll call that figure, and when it comes up on the number 1 beat, she'll say, round and around and around you go, and the 2 pretty ladies, do-si-do. You say, well, that can, you know, all that stuff can get mixed up in the command, and you'll miss the command. Now, if you've been dancing to her calls, you can do that. You can do that. You know, round and around and around you go, and the 2 ladies, do-si-do. Now, when I call a figure, don't call it that way. You know.
How would you call it?
I'll say, all right, 2 ladies, do-si-do. Yeah. And I'll turn it to the right, and around you go, you know. And now you gents, you ought to know, you know, and turn that circle left, and around you go. Well, I'll make sure that I get the commands out clear so that the dancers know what to do. And it's not necessary to run up and down the floor and use a whole lot of patter. It's okay if you're entertaining yourself and you got experienced dancers that you've been calling to every week. You know what you're going to say anyway.
Could you talk a bit about when you were calling like 50 years ago, and they were community dances, not the clogging team, but like a community dance? Could you describe what that looked like back then?
Well, usually the dancers that you have that you get up, they're inexperienced and never danced, you know. the first thing I say, well, does any of you ever square danced? You know, and no, and they'll hold their hands up, you know, and I said, well, that's good. And you know, then you got to bend way down to start them, and you can't use the same kind of pattern, the same kind of instruction that you use to a 4-couple set that know how to dance, you see. Now, so then you got to take it step by step. You got to take it step by step, and I usually do with a crowd like that. You know, I usually tell them, well, I have you going in 5 minutes, because if you don't, with dancers like that to begin with, you don't have much time. And if you don't get them going pretty soon, they'll lose interest and it gets too complicated. So usually I'll have them say, well, you know, this is my left and this is my right. And you know, and if you're a man and you got a partner, put her on your right-hand side. You know, and that lady's your partner. And I say, howdy, partner, you know. And you get that, you get that settled. Now the other lady that you're going to be working with, she's over here on your left. You say, or I'm talking to the man.
Yeah.
I said, now, you know, most of the time, and the way I get around that, I usually say, now most of the commands are given to the men. And I said, there's reason for that, you know. The ladies can usually figure that out, but the men, they have a little trouble once in a while. So anyway, that's how I get around that. But anyway, then I said, now that lady over on your left, we'll call her your opposite lady. She's your opposite of your corner. And some of the older callers refer to her as a contrary. You probably never heard that, see? And they refer to your corner as a contrary. And so that's your corner, and I say, howdy, corner. And then the next thing I'll teach them to swing. And then I'll show them 3 different kinds of swings. And I'll show them the 2-handed swing is the old-time customary swing, because back in the old days it just wasn't customary to put your hands on a lady's waist. So then I show them a 2-handed swing, which is the old traditional swing. And then I show them the ballroom swing. And then I make a little joke about that.
What joke do you make?
Huh?
What's the joke?
Oh, I just said, you know, if you can get your arm around one, you go for it, guys, you know. And then if I got young people, and this is important, if you got young people, they don't like to touch each other, and they won't hardly touch each other's hands. Say, use your right elbow swing. You know, I just finished a session in a grade school with 6 classes of kindergarten up to the 5th grade, and so I use the elbow swing with them. And sometimes it's better to use an elbow swing if you got beginners, and because it teaches them the fundamentals of the dance, you know, the mechanics of the dance. But you always show them the alternate, you know, and the correct rate of swing. But you don't, if you got beginners, you don't have much time. You don't want to beat them up with a lot of instruction. Yeah. Now, if you're teaching a workshop, you're teaching square dance workshop, then you can get into that.
And when you were first calling, and when you were in this clogging team, I'm just trying to picture, was it something really popular? Were a lot of people doing clogging and square dancing?
Contesting?
Yeah.
Oh, yes.
Like all your friends did it?
Oh, let me tell you, you know, I've served in every office the Hall of Fame had. I was the president, the vice president, and I served as their treasurer, their workshop chairman. And we had competitions when we would have our world champion dance-off, for instance. You know, we had 400 solo dancers in the stomping ground at Maggie Valley, just to give you an idea of how many people you have. Now, normally at a sanctioned competition where you go to qualify to dance in this world competition, they won't be that big. Because, you know, it involves, for one thing, it involves money, and they have to be so big to justify the cost of if you're a team director and you're going to host a competition, then it's got to make money. So you can't pay for it out of your pocket. So usually some of those will be pretty crowded. And but to give you an example, when I first started out, they only had 9 categories that you danced in, and and you had to have 65, at least 65 team dances, because you charge so much per dance to buy your trophies and pay for your competition.
And I'm wondering, so your parents were Italian, right? Your parents were Italian. So my mom is Belgian. She moved here from Belgium, and so I'm really interested in hearing about what it was like back when you first were born and were growing up here.
Okay. Now, my dad and mom both were Italian immigrants, and my mom was 7 years old when she came over to this country, and my dad was 16 years old. And when my dad came to this country, he couldn't speak a word of English, not a word. Well, he had a sister and a brother-in-law that were here, because back then you had to have a sponsor and you had to have a place to go. You just couldn't waltz into this country. So they settled up at Spruce. They brokered for workers. And it was 1910 when my dad came. And he went to work at Spruce on a green broadsheet. Huh?
What is Spruce? It's a coal mine?
Spruce is close to Cass. And the big mill was at Cass. But Dad worked at Spruce. And they were lumbering at Spruce. And he lived at Spruce. He lived with my brother-in-law and his sister. And he was what they call a gandy dancer, and they built track and trestles ahead of the logging crews so the trains could run on them. And he was there for a while, and my brother-in-law, or my dad's brother-in-law and his sister moved to Detroit, and Dad stayed. He went to Cass and went to work in the shop at Cass. In 1913, he worked in the shop at Cass. And he was a boilermaker. That's where he learned his trade as a boilermaker. And then from there he went to Pittsburgh, and then he went to Handley, and where I was, close to where I was born. And that's where he met my mom. But my dad, he started his education when he first got here. Now he believed that education was important. And he believed music was important. That was good for your social culture.
Was he a musician? Was he a musician? Did he play music?
He tried to learn to play accordion, but he never could. He never did really get good at it. But anyway, he got a tutor and learned to speak English. And then he started his education at Slady Fork at a school there. And he went to school till he was 40 years old. And he graduated from New River State College and at West Virginia Tech now, and he had a degree in English and in economics, and he was one of the few Italians. Well, he was the only one that I know of in Montgomery that could read and write English and read and write Italian. Because I can remember when them old timers would come in there and they'd have a letter from the old country, they couldn't read it. And I seen Dad sit at the table and read the letter, and then they'd dictate the answer and he'd write it in Italian and then mail it back. But Dad was better educated than probably the first 3 levels of management in the shop, in the railroad where he worked. But, back then, growing up Italian was tough. I can tell you that. And I lived those days,
What was it like?
Well, there's a lot of discrimination back then, just like they were with the blacks. And the Italian people were very clannish. and it wasn't by choice, you know, it was out of necessity. And we had our own restaurants, you know, and we had the Sons of Italy organization and the Sons of Italy Hall, and we had our own entertainment, our dances and stuff like that. Of course, the schools were integrated when we went to school, but you know, I had my stereotype names, you know, going through school, and and you still have some of that, but it's not bad. It's just like the blacks. You still have a lot of that, but it's getting better every year. But
could you describe you said that there was like Italian dance and Italian entertainment. What did that look like?
The what?
The dance and
Well,
for the Italian.
you know, we had another generation, you know, and I was learning to dance, you know. I started teaching dancing when I was 13, and the generation that I grew up in was going to high school and going to the socials and stuff like that. But the older generation, the first generation that got here, like my dad and them, what I call the old timers, you know, they had the old country ways, the old country music, and we'd go to the Sons of Italy Hall too, but the music that they played was a little bit different, but you know, for my generation, you know, I was in school and I was doing the dances that they did then. I've been teaching dancing since I was 13 years old.
What did you teach when you were 13?
I taught jitterbug. But I taught jitterbug and two-step. And they didn't have swing dancing back then. But jitterbug was the thing. And later on I taught Texas two-step and the East Coast swing. And
how did you learn all of that?
well, I just learned it. My sister, I think she learned it first, but she was a year younger than me. And I was always a stickler. I had to find out how things worked. And you know, I watched them dance and I listened to music. And I could tell with the music where they were starting and how many steps they took. And it didn't take me long to figure out how to teach. I learned how to do it myself. And then I thought about it and I thought, now I got to figure out a way to teach this, you know. Then I broke it down in my mind till I could teach it. And, you know, jitterbug's really easy. I could teach you jitterbug in 5 minutes.
Cool.
And the East Coast swing's the same. You know, I could teach you in 5 minutes how to jitterbug, or Texas two-step's easy too.
And how did you go from that to clogging?
Well, that's a story in itself too. Now, my dad, like I said, he grew up in he worked in Pocahontas County. And the way that I got interested in the old-time flatfoot dance was my brother was a couple of years older than me, and he played football in high school, and he broke his ankle. Well, back then they'd keep you in the hospital a week with a broken ankle. Well, my dad worked the evening shift. He went to work at 2:30, and he'd always swing down by the hospital and see my brother. Well, he was in a 2-bed ward, and there was a fellow named Jackson from Pocahontas County that lived at just west of Marlington just a little bit. And of course, Dad got to talking to him back and forth, and they found out that they had a lot of mutual friends and a lot of mutual interests. Of course, Dad knew all the Italian families that settled in Marlington, and he knew a lot of the people from over around Cass. And Wayne was the guy's name, was Wayne Jackson, and so they talked every day. And Wayne's wife come down and brought Junior, Wayne the second, and I met him. He was the same age as I am. I think I'm 3 months older than he is. But anyway, when my brother got out of the hospital and Wayne went home, that was the end of that. But one Sunday my dad was going to go up to Marlington to visit. So he stopped at the house, and I was married then. That's the first year I was married. And didn't know if I wanted to ride up with him, so I did. Because I'd already met Junior and his mom. And I went up and had dinner with him. I never will forget what I had for dinner, because that's a whole story in itself. But she had home-cured, sugar-cured ham. But that was the entree that she had. And I dearly love sugar-cured ham. And every place I eat, I search for that taste. And the taste is still there because her granddaughter and her husband, they sugar cure ham. Not as good as what she cured for a couple of reasons, but that was a whole ham story. But anyway, I went up there that Sunday and I got acquainted with Junior, and Junior liked to hunt and I liked to hunt. So I went up there one Sunday. I went up and I went turkey hunting with him. The man that owned the place, they owned 2,500 acres, and they wouldn't allow any hunting in there, but he did allow me to go in there with Junior. But Junior took me back on, they had 1,000 acres back on Williams River. So Junior took me back on Williams River with him once. I don't remember if it was Saturday or Sunday. We didn't pay much attention to the seasons, we just went hunting. And there was 3 families that lived back there, and it was a family of carpenters. And one of them's name was Dan Carpenter, and Dan played the clawhammer banjo. And it was on Sunday when we was back there hunting. And of course they gather every Sunday or Saturday. They'd gather in a house, and somebody had a fiddle and somebody had a banjo. And there was an old fiddler there named Jess Moore. He played the fiddle, and Dan played the clawhammer banjo. And Dan danced, he did the old time flatfoot dance. And I was really fascinated by that and the banjo picking. And that's where I got interested in the banjo, and I got interested in the old time style of flatfoot dancing. Well, flatfoot dancing is, you just dance, people ask me what flatfoot dancing is, and I said, well, it's just a feeling that comes from within, where your feet and legs, they move around in rhythm with the measure and the beat of the music, and if you're doing something with your feet and legs, it's okay if it feels good. And but that's how I got interested in the old time flatfoot dance and the square dance. And then through that, I met the Hammondses that way. The Hammonds lived over at Woodrow, and Junior knew the Hammondses, and I remember one time we took a load of wood back to Sherman and unloaded it for him. And Sherman played the banjo back there for me, and Sherman played the fiddle too. And Dan had a brother named Hamp that played the fiddle, Hamp Carpenter. But those names are probably familiar to you see, but I know them firsthand. But anyway, and then...
And you were a kid then? Or no, you were a young adult?
What's that?
How old were you then?
I was 21. And then there was a place up on top of the hill there, going out of Martin. Gilbert Jack owned the beer joint up there. And Gilbert was the justice of the peace, I believe, he was a constable, but anyway, had a beer joint. And every Saturday night they'd have square dances in at Gilbert Jack's, and I got to go in there and listening to them play and watching them dance, and I really got into that old time style.
What can you describe the beer hall, what it looked like?
What's that?
The beer hall, what it looked like for the dance.
It was just a hall. They had a bar across the front, I remember, and this part was open, some tables around the outside. It was a dance hall, the beer joint, and it was called Gilbert Jack's. And the Lance Funeral Home was there now, is where you turn into Lance Funeral Home. Gilbert Jack's was in that building right there.
And was it was it a pretty wild square dance, or were were women allowed to go back then?
Well, you know, they drank a lot of beer and a lot of whiskey, but now I never did see any fights up there. I never did see any fights at Gilbert Jack's. And then I used to, and that was the extent of my square dancing, you know, and was there, and there's where I got interested in the banjo and the old time dancing. And then I kind of backed off from it for a while, for a few years, and then I got back into it. I learned to play the banjo, and like I said, I never could chord on it, so I quit playing. But I really got into dancing a lot.
What made you get back into it?
Well, it was just the company that I was keeping. I still continued to go to Pocahontas County, and I still liked the dances. But I had a crowd that I run around with, and where I lived, neighbors and friends, and we went to other kind of dances. And
what kind of dance?
Well, you know, old jitterbug, two-step dances and stuff like that. What we call the modern dances. And then I kind of got away from it and got back into it. And I didn't take any formal dancing lessons till I was 53 years old, but I could really dance. And I took some formal lessons when I joined that clogging team. And
you were in your 50s when you joined the clogging team?
Yeah, I was 53 years old when I joined the clogging team. And I won a lot of solo dances too. I danced a lot before I won any, but after I won my first one, I didn't lose many after that.
And did your wife, she liked to dance?
Oh yeah, she was a good dancer. She had a lot of poise and stage presence, and Jitterbug was her favorite too. But she square danced with me. She went with me. And
how did you meet her?
Well, I worked for the phone company, and when I was growing up, I didn't exactly lead a sheltered life, you know, and I got around pretty good. And I was working in the town where she lived, and I was set up on a pole, and I could see her house down the block. And she got off the school bus over here because the post office was there, but she'd stop and she'd go in the post office, and then she'd walk down past where I was working. And I got to talking to her, and I knew what her telephone number was because I had the company records there and the job I was doing. So I waited till she got in the house. I saw where she had a phone, and I waited till she got in the house, and I could see when she walked in the house, and then I called her. And that's how I got acquainted with her. And the first date I had with her, first time I asked her for a date, I saw her one time after that at a football game over at East Bank. And I asked her for a date, she backed out on me, and she fixed me up with her girlfriend. So I took her to the movies that night, and then later on I asked her out again, but that's how I met her. You know, she walked by where I was working, you know. I worked there a couple of days, and I'd talk to her when she'd come by on her way from the post office to home.
And she was on the clogging team too?
Well, of course we were married when I joined that clogging team, and you asked me how I got back into it. She had a niece, her sister's girl. She was married to a guy, and he danced. He had a style that he danced. And then one of the Hammondses was working on the power plant when it was building the power plant at Glasgow. And he was boarding with my mother-in-law. She kept boarders. And Pat Hammonds. And Pat was a good mountain dancer. And I watched them two, and then I got I could dance. I had my own style of old-time dance. I thought, well, I think I'll take some formal clogging lessons and learn how to do some precision dancing. And then after I learned that, then I met a friend that was dancing on this clogging team, and male dancers were in big demand because back then you had to have the smallest contingent you could have was 4 males and 4 females, and back then that was a traditional dance, and you couldn't dance the girls as boys. So anyway, I joined the team that my buddy was on, and that's how I got started.
If you had to pick one of your favorite dances that you've ever called, going to an actual event, do you have one in mind that you really had a good time?
What?
A square dance.
At a square dance? Yeah, the 9-pin. I really like to call the 9-pin.
Can you describe that?
Huh?
Can you describe it?
Well, and I'll call it tonight, but the 9-pin is a dance where you have, now, I did some research on it, and I couldn't find anything that bared a resemblance, in any of the books I ever read. And the only figure that I could find that bared any resemblance to the 9-pin was a dance called Tucker. And they had one odd man, and when the couples would become disengaged from their partner, that man could steal the partner, you see. And then the other guy had to be Tucker. But anyway, the 9-pin set up in 4 couples, and you have one odd lady in the middle, and she's the 9-pin. And you have, well, I'll describe the dance to you. You have 4 couples. You circle left and around you go, and then you do an opening figure, and then you got one woman in the middle of the ring. Well, you count the men off. They have the 4 couples have well-defined parts. Gent number 1, he's here, and 2's there, and 3's there, and the lady, you say, well, 9-pin out and swing number 1. Well, she swings the number 1 man. And then you say, now put him back and swing number 3. And, he's the one from Tennessee. Mm-hmm. And then you have him swing the other 2. And then you say, well, let's all 5 ladies into the middle. You dance all around to the tune of the fiddle. And then you have a word, and the word is swing. And when the caller says swing, there's 5 ladies dancing and only 4 men. And 4 of those ladies, they run out and they get one of the men, and then they got whoever's left over has to dance in the middle of the 9-pin. Now I tell stories with mine.
Yeah, can you say some of the stories you tell?
Yeah, I tell stories that incorporate the word swing, and they usually talk about things that I grew up with. Now, some of the things I have to watch what I say because, some of the kids that dance now, they're not familiar with the things that I grew up. I'll say, like once I had an old coon dog, blind as he could be. Every night at supper time, I believe that dog could see. Well, kids can't relate to that, possum up the cinnamon tree and the rabbit on the ground, they just, those things were common in my life. And then I incorporate the word swing in there somewhere,
Yeah.
And maybe cross some other, up the hill, the dogs done treated by the moonshine still, and they don't even know what that is. But that's my favorite dance to call.
And is that one, would you call that kind of dance in the clogging team as well?
I don't do that in the clogging team.
Because what's the difference? What's a good dance?
That's a fun dance.
Yeah.
Now, in the clogging team, I'd do a 4-couple hoedown. And I'd do 4 good figures that were recognizable, and you start out with an opening figure. Now, I might call a figure. Now, I try to do something that's showy and a little bit complex, you see. Now, I might call a figure like turn the wheel. I'd use that for an opening figure. And then I might do a 4-couple cumulative figure with my first figure, where it involved everybody. And then I'll do a short figure with number 2, and then a long figure, a short figure with 2 and 3, and then I'll do another complicated longer figure. and you had a time limit, you see, and then I did a break figure in between those. Now, some people use different break figures, but I used the same break figure. But I always had a good opening figure and a closing figure, because it's important. You know, you can't start. It's kind of like dancing in competition. You can't hit the front of the stage with a ho-hum figure. You see, you gotta get the judge's attention. You gotta do something that, you know. And the same way with when you got 5 judges sitting there, you know, and they've been looking at dances all day long. You got to have something to make them raise an eyebrow. And
do you have a go-to dance to make them raise an eyebrow? Do you have like one dance that's really showy?
Well, you know, now I did turn the wheel for an opening figure. It's a nice showy figure. And then I would use my first figure. I might do cutaway 3, you know, 2, 3, and 4. And, you know, there's ways you do that where you can do a lot of footwork in it. Now, Steve Ballman calls it, he just goes down the middle and cut away 3, you see. Well, I never called that figure because when I did research on it, I found it in a book 100 years old. And you go down the middle, and the 2 people that are standing opposite you bring them back. And then you take them back down, you set them out, and then you divide the world and you come back around. And where I have now everybody swing your partner, you see. And then I have all 4 couples swing, so it involves everybody. But usually when I start that figure, and when I go around, you know, I always, when I got to the end of and I went there and I divided the world, you know, we always did kind of a rise and shine there, you know, and come around. And there's a lot of opportunity for good showy footwork and stuff like that.
Do you think,
and then maybe figure number 2, you might chase a rabbit, chase a squirrel. But,
and do you think back, like when you were going to dances at this beer hall, were they doing flat-footing while they danced?
Yeah, they did a style of flat-foot.
Like everyone would dance?
Some of them did, some of them didn't. But a lot of them used a lot of footwork.
And did they have metal? They had tap shoes?
No.
Because you have tap shoes,
well,
right?
Well, I used them too, but they were allowed in competition. Now, you know, originally, they didn't have but one category, and that was square dancing, smooth mountain square dance. And you know, Lamar Bascom, you know, they had the Blue Ridge Mountain Festival back in 1939, and he had a competition there, and they only had one category. Well, the so-called mountain dancers from Maggie Valley, they joined that and they won that. Well, the next year, the so-called mountain dancers, they went to that same competition, and they all used flatfoot dancing steps, and they won the competition again. Well, there was a big row over that. You see, well, they weren't really dancing. That really wasn't square dancing, but it was. And that changed the complexion because the next year they allowed footwork in it. And from here on, now they still had a category called smooth mountain square dance where you just used a glide step, but the 8 couple hoedown, you use clogging steps and flatfoot steps and all the rest of them. In the hoedown categories, you used steps. But that's how that got started.
And what did people wear?
Well, they wore costumes just like they do now in the competitions.
And what about the community dances at the beer hall?
Oh, in the beer halls, they just wore their everyday clothes.
Yeah, cool. And could you describe like the music back then?
The music was very much like it is now. It was because the music was old-time fiddle tunes, of Mississippi Sawyer and Old Joe Clark and those the same tunes that they're playing today for square dances. Mm-hmm. And you know, my team wore costumes and we dressed alike.
Could you talk a bit about advice that you would give to young callers?
Well, I've taught a lot of workshops in calling, and not the only advice young callers that people that want to learn to call, I tell them, you know, the first thing you want to do is learn square dance. Now you go and you learn the square dance, and if you're a young caller like you, and I got plenty of, you know, I got every figure I ever called, and I got them all downloaded to my computer, and but now there ain't many callers can call as many figures, but I can call every one of them. And I don't need nothing to write them down on, you see. And but the best advice I could give a young caller, now, except for over at Cliff Top, you know, they usually have a lot of guest callers, and like tonight we'll have 3. Mm-hmm. Well, Cliff Top has 2, and then we don't call any guest callers up over there. Occasionally I'll have somebody come up and join me and do a big circle, but that's because, you know, they have to have insurance on everything over there, and well, the callers know they're not their liable. If I get up there and call a figure, you fall and break a leg. Well, yeah, that caller didn't tell me that floor was slick, and he didn't tell me this was strenuous, you know, and so I've been down that road, I know. But the best advice I'd give a young caller would be to learn square dance, and then learn 2 or 3 figures that you can call, because no way you're going to be able to do that, and or carry a 3-hour dance by yourself. So you learn 2 or 3 figures that you could call that you really like, and then most of the dances that you go to, they have guest callers, and a lot of the guest callers will ask me, I say, well, you're going to call, what would you like to call, you know, and I'll ask them right at first, because I don't want to jump ahead of them and call the same figure they'd call, because I can work around callers, you know. I don't care what you call, I can call something that you, and so you learn 2 or 3 figures, and you learn to call them good. Now, most of the callers, they copy somebody else's, you know, like I said, you get painted with the same brush, and that's the way you get started. And then as you get comfortable, then you add a figure or 2, and because if you're an old-time caller, you don't want to get to where you have to read, you know, because Western callers can do that, because their calls are all called in the phrase of the music and in time with the music, in the same way with contra callers, you know, that you can shut your eyes and call a contra dance, but hoedown you got to watch the floor, but you learn 2 or 3 figures. And when you go to a square dance, you call. They'll ask you up to call, and you call a couple, and you add a couple more, and you add a couple more, and you gotta. I don't say crawl a little bit, but you got to walk a little bit before you can run, and you'll copy whoever teaches you. You'll copy whoever teaches you, and you get a little bit here, and you get a little bit there, but down the road somewhere you want to develop your own style. Now, I went to a thing over at Flatwoods. They had at a farm over, and there was 2 girls called over there, and they learned listening to Mike at Glenville. Well, they called 2 figures, and they just verbatim, you know, word for word, and I would, of course, how a person learns, that's up to them, you see, but I just never wanted to be painted with the same brush that somebody else was. And but to a new caller, I'd say learn one or two figures and learn those good, and you get your chance. You tell the caller, the host caller, that I can call this and I can call that, and if he's any kind of a man, he'll say, well, go ahead, I'll work around him.
And a couple other questions. One, could you describe how you end a square dance? Like the end pattern for a dance?
Well, that's it. You know, I've been asked that a lot of times. Now here again, you get into hoedown. Now you have a lot of freedom with hoedown, and you don't dance and call in the phrase of the music. You know, you call in time with the music, and you try to. If you get into a 16 and a 32 beat, or now my swings are usually 4 and 8 beats, but I don't call in the phrase of the music. Even the Virginia reel, when I call it hoedown, because somebody always gets behind, unless you're at one of these contra dances. Now they dance in the phrase of the music, and the way I usually end the square dance, because see, I watch the floor. If this set gets behind, I'll let this one over here circle. Well, I see right away this dance is in a different place than the music, and you couldn't start at the same place, you see. So then when they get ready, I said, all right, then I'll go ahead and start the figure. And that's good for the dancers. That's good for the dancers. You don't have your sets breaking down. And then when you get to the end of the dance, you're listening to the music, and if you're doing a figure, and it's a 4-couple figure, and the figure's over, and you dance your break figure, and you do a swing your partner twice around, Allemande left to right and left grand. When you meet your partner, promenade. Well, if they're in the middle of a 32 beat measure, what I usually do, I just tell them, well, y'all promenade, where I don't care, just promenade right off the floor. That's all there is, ain't no more. And when the band plays that, I'll raise my foot up when the band gets to the end of that part of the tune, they'll just quit. Or I'll tell them now, everybody swing your partner, and y'all swing and dance right up here to the bandstand, and put your hands together for this good band. And then I'll raise my foot up, and the fiddler will know to quit then, you see.
Yeah.
They ask that question all the time.
Yeah, what you're describing is exactly what I get myself into. When they're doing different times, there's multiple squares, yeah.
Let me tell you something. Yeah. That's a mark of a good caller. If you can do that, you keep your eye on the floor. I've been calling for 50 years. I was up at Marlington at the roadkill dance, and I had a man come up to me after the dance was over. He said, "Buddy," he said, "that was the best dance, the best calling I ever heard in my life." And he said, "I've been dancing all my life." He said, "You knew exactly what was going on the floor, and you knew when to do this and when to do that." And that was a real compliment, because I was calling that dance in the hoedown style, and I was watching the set, and I was calling to the set, not just to one square. Now, you can pick out one square that's in time, and you can adjust your speed to that. But when it comes to the end of that tip, then you got to do something till the rest of them can get caught up.
What do you do if one square is just totally a mess?
Just let them dance.
Yeah.
Just let them dance. And I tell them now, if you get mixed up, just grin and smile. We'll figure it out. And because the set breaks all the way down, and if the whole dance breaks down, I had this happen to me last week. I had 3 sets on the floor over at Newcastle, and I just, well, I saw the sets were breaking down. I said, all right, everybody swing your partner and promenade home, and we'll start over again. And that's just the way you got to do it. And you can't let it get the best of you.
I really like some of the dances you say, now we're cooking.
Huh?
You'll say like, now we're cooking, or something like that. You'll say that.
Now what?
Now we're cooking?
Yeah, oh yeah, we got it now. And I'll take one individual on the floor, and he's having trouble. Pretty soon he gets it, I say, buddy, you got it now, and he knows I'm talking to him, you see. And you got to be aware of what's going on the floor, And when they get to doing it good, boy said, we're cooking now, and so.
Cool.
And the hardest thing you'll have to teach them, the hardest thing you'll have to teach is a new caller. And the hardest thing that people have to learn square dancing is the Allemande left and the right and left grand.
Do you split those, or do you always teach it together?
Well, I usually teach the right and left grand first. And then I'll teach the left hand turn to your corner. And then I'll say, now swing your partner twice around. And you put them three together. Now, it's hard to do. But I taught it over at Newcastle. Margie didn't want me to teach it, but I said, Margie, I'm going to teach it. And I got it going, and they had a good time with it. Cool. And everybody can't learn it. Everybody can't learn it. But every caller calls it. Now, I have gone through the whole night and never called. If I don't have much time, and like if I'm dealing with kids in school, then I just do right and left grand, because they can do that. But just as soon as you tell them to turn their corner and then go back, then they're all mixed up.
And do you have kids?
Do I have what?
Kids? Children? Do you have children?
They're both dead. I have two girls.
Did they, when you were raising them, did they dance?
Well, I taught them both to dance, but neither one of them danced on the team with me. My grandkids did.
Do they still dance?
Oh yeah, my grandson, both of them are excellent dancers. My granddaughter's got the best sound and the best rhythm of any dancer I ever saw. She's heavy, but that don't hurt her, buddy. She can lay them down. And,
clogging.
Yeah. She flatfoot dances too.
And what's the difference between flatfooting? I know you get asked this a lot. What's the difference between flatfooting and clogging?
Well, clogging is usually more of it's a style, different style. Now there's a freestyle in it, but it usually has precision style steps in it. And they use clogging in their line dances and stuff like that, their precision dances. And flatfoot is usually a freestyle dance. And the footwork is different, and it has a different look. It has a different look. When you play my tape, you'll see what I'm talking about.
In this, you're teaching flatfoot.
Yeah, this is a flatfoot tape. Now, I'll demonstrate a clogging step in there, but everything in there is flatfoot.
Cool. And just last question, what do you want people to remember about your square dancing, or your square dances? When they leave, what do you want them to think?
No, I just want them to know that they had a good time, and I really enjoyed that guy's calling, and that's the main thing. Western square dancers, they sing their calls. They all sound the same, so what can you say about it? And if you do a figure here in Fairmont, you go to California and they do a teacup chain, it's the same thing, no difference. There's no richness or beauty to it, you see. It's not uncommon to do one figure and have three different names, and maybe just a little bit different the way they do their break. For instance, Bay of the Ocean, Mike calls that uptown, downtown. They're pretty much the same, but the way they end, but all that adds to the beauty of the dance. And so.
Cool. Well, thanks so much, Lou. Is there anything else you want to say before we
I don't
go
know, I rattled here for an hour.
No, it was great. It was great. Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Now, you know, if you wanted to talk about one specific thing, I could do something pretty good, you know, about that, but we touched on a lot of things.
Oh, it was
you know.
great though. Yeah. Because I want the students don't know anything about square dancing or about you. So for me, this is a chance for them to kind of get a sense about a lot of different things and pick out something.
Well, I'm probably the oldest active caller in the world now. And I've called square dances from the west to the east, and from the north to the south. And and I don't know another caller. I know Garland Steele, you heard me talk about him, but he got out of it, and Garland was the best caller that I ever heard. He had the best voice that carried the best, and we used to call him the silver tongue of the South. And absolutely the clearest voice and the best voice for square dance calling. And he was the world's leading authority on four couple hoedown figures.
And he called without a microphone?
We called on the set, but he called without a microphone too. And he's just the best I ever saw. Now Dale Nichols was a good caller, but he didn't have the voice that Garland had.
What was his voice like? It just was really loud? Or?
Yeah, it was loud. I got recordings of him at home. I wish I'd have brought one. Sometime I'll let you hear him. And but he was the best. I enjoyed him better than anybody. You know, he never missed one of his calls, and he never had to go like that. And he was a good dancer too. He did a wooden shoe dance.
A what shoe?
A wooden shoe.
Would you shoe dance?
Wooden shoe.
Wouldn't you dance?
Yeah.
I don't know anything about that.
Well, he ordered a set of wooden shoes from over in England somewhere, and man, he can make them. And I was in the process of putting together a wooden shoe competition when I quit fooling with the Hall of Fame, but I never did make that materialize. But.
And what did your parents think about you calling square dances, or were they around when you started?
Well, most of them were. You know, my mom died in 1961, and I was just getting into dancing then. And my dad, he died in 71. And you know, I started late in life, and my dad's, we spent a lot of time together because we hunted together, and but we never did get involved in the dancing thing. And the cooking, yeah, I learned a lot of cooking from my mom, a lot of the old Italian dishes. I still use her recipes today.
Wow. Did you speak Italian with either of them?
Back when I was growing up, my grandmother's family taught it a lot. But see, my dad was going to college studying English. Now, mom and dad, they talked it in the house a little bit, but us kids, the only time we used it when we was around my grandma, because, you know, she spoke broken English and she used Italian all the time. Now, I always regretted that I never learned to speak Italian fluently. And I had a golden opportunity.
What was your opportunity? Oh, just being with your parents, yeah.
You know, my dad was an Italian scholar, and I could have learned. We spent hours and hours together, and I could understand anything they said. You know, my grandmother talked Italian all the time, and I understood every word she said, and I could understand what my dad and mom was saying all the time. And but I just never did. And I could talk, you know, if I was hungry, I could ask him for something to eat, or I could cuss you out in Italian, or I could get by, you know, back when I was younger. But if I had it to do over again, of course, I didn't do good to school either. I went back to school after after I went to work for occupational improvement. But I was, you know, you can't go back and get that. There's so many things you can look back and say, well, I wish I did. But there's two things I would have learned. I would have learned to speak Spanish and English. And Italian.
Spanish too?
Yeah, there's two languages I would have learned.
Why Spanish?
Well, it's so much like Italian. There's so much of it around now.
Yeah.
See?
Yeah. For me, my mom was nervous that I wouldn't speak good English, so she didn't really teach me a lot of Dutch when I was little. Did your parents try and really?
No, I just learned what, I just listened to them. I could always understand. I never did miss anything. I always knew what they was talking about. I could understand everything they said, but I just never did talk back. Now, back then, I could talk back some if I had to,
And your wife, was she Italian?
No, she wasn't Italian. She was English. She was a Hall. She was raised down here in Clay County. At Survey, close to Survey. And, but...
Cool, well, thank you so much.
Well, I'm glad to do it.
Yeah.
I hope I helped you a little bit.
Yeah, I love the story about how you met your wife. That's so beautiful.
Let me tell you a story about when I was born. Now, my dad had bird dogs, and I had rabbit beagles. But when I was born, I was the third one to come along. My dad worked the evening shift. This is a true story. My dad had a bird dog that was heavy with pups, about to have her pups. Mom was in labor with me. Dad come in the house at 11:30, and the way our house was laid off, you come into a hallway, and his bedroom was here, and the living room was here. And the doctor was with my mom at 11:30, and Dad come right to the bedroom, didn't even set his bucket down. And she said, "Where are you going, Joe?" I said, "I'm going to go see if my dog had pups yet." And my bird dog had her pups yet. And that's a true story. And out the back door he went and checked on his dog to see if that bird dog had them pups, and he come back in the house. And so the doctor was there with Mom. That's a true story.
That's funny.
I don't remember what the dog's name was. I just know it was a female dog.
Cool. Wow. Yeah.
I can see my dad right now going through that room, buddy. right straight. Hallway went straight through. And he went right out the back door to the dog's coop and checked his dog, see if she had pups, and then back in the house he came.
Could your mom laugh with that?
Yeah, she told me about that.
Wow, that's funny. That's really funny. Well, thank you so much. We'll let you